If a company like EA deliberately made your champs games harder, on purpose, that would be illegal. What's interesting is the loophole, a way to get a very similar result without ever touching the scoreline directly. There's an experience many FC players describe when they hit a turning point in champs. You feel ready, the numbers look fine, nothing obvious has changed. And yet the responsiveness feels different. Slower, heavier, more resistant to your inputs, just as the match starts to matter. Most of the time people blame the servers, bad luck, or believe the game is literally rigging the outcome. In this episode, we're going to look at something more grounded, yet even more unsettling. How a modern matchmaking system can legally allow a harder match to happen, without ever deciding who wins. For legal clarity, we are not alleging that EA intentionally manipulate match outcomes. This is a hypothetical systems analysis based on standard industry design principles, the same principles used in mobile games, shooters, MOBAs and competitive ladders across the industry. We've already talked in How EA Keeps You Going about engagement optimized systems, the idea that players are constantly profiled, tagged and sorted by how likely they are to keep playing. Here, we're going to apply that same logic to one thing people assume is neutral: your connection. Player A enters the champs matchmaking pool on a long winning streak. To the system, that streak isn't just a number in the record. It's a behavioural signal. This player is performing well, staying engaged and showing no sign of quitting. In the language of optimization, they look stable. Now this doesn't mean that the system wants them to lose to keep them interested. It means something subtler. The model predicts they can tolerate and maybe even enjoy a more demanding match. At the same time, the system spots player B. Similar skill, similar recent form, available at the same moment. On a completely clean route, low latency, stable packets, consistent response, this is a balanced contest. 50-50, no rigging, no hidden boost. Just two similar players meeting in the middle. If every decision stopped here, champs would feel very different for a lot of people. Now we add the part that most players never see. The network route between A and B is not perfect. On paper, it's fine. It sits within the acceptable range written into the terms and conditions you click past. But behind the scenes, jitter, packet variability and route stability all make one thing more likely: spikes, delay, moments where the game feels just a fraction off. Now these conditions are common. They don't require any intervention. They show up naturally in a global network, especially on a busy weekend. And they have a predictable effect. They make the match feel harder, even when the opponent is not. Here's the important step. The system now has a decision to make. Option 1, send player A to a slightly weaker opponent on a very clean route, or option 2, send them to player B, the equal opponent, on a shakier route that still sits within the acceptable box. Modern matchmaking doesn't just optimise for one thing. It tries to satisfy several goals at once. Keep queue times reasonable, keep engagement high, keep games roughly fair, keep the servers balanced, and keep people who are at risk of leaving, commonly referred to in the industry as churning, from hitting too many frustrating matches in a row. Connection quality is in that mix, but it is not always at the top. If player A looks emotionally stable and highly engaged, the system can afford to spend some of their comfort. It can choose the more demanding option, equal skill, weaker route, because the connection still technically meets the standard you agreed to. Nothing has been added, nothing has been sabotaged. The system just doesn't rescue you from the weaker route. That's a mission, not intervention. Let's zoom in on what that means. The game doesn't have to push your opponent up or your stats down. All it has to do is stop protecting you from good enough latency. Your rival stays the same, the rules stay the same, but the whole contest is now wrapped in slightly worse responsiveness. If a company like EA sat in a room and said, "Flag this player, make his button presses worse and make sure he loses this game," that would cross a legal line in a lot of countries. If you explicitly target outcomes, forcing losses, faking results, secretly changing gameplay rules mid-match, you start moving into fraud, unfair commercial practice, and potentially gambling regulation. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something much harder to see and much easier to defend. Letting a weaker route stand, as long as it sits inside the box they've already defined as acceptable. Here's the loophole. If the rules say we will connect you to opponents within a certain ping range, and gameplay experience may vary, then as long as the match stays inside that range, a company doesn't have to give you the best possible route. They only have to give you a route that's good enough to meet their own standard. Inside that box, they can let other objectives take the lead. If engagement, fairness over time, and queue health are higher priorities than perfection on every single match, the system can sacrifice a bit of responsiveness for some players in some moments, and still say, truthfully, that everything is working as designed. From the outside, it feels like the game is against me. From the inside, it's just the cost of running a multi-objective system at scale. This is the part players recognise. People don't sit around remembering the smooth games on Saturday afternoon. They remember the one that cost them a rank, the match where their team suddenly felt heavy at 9-1. Those are emotionally loaded moments. In the kind of behavioural models we've already talked about in previous episodes, they're tagged as high engagement situations. If the system allows weaker routes to stand in those moments, because the player looks stable and the skill match looks ideal, you get a very specific pattern. The game feels at its worst exactly when you care the most. Not because someone is flipping a lose switch, but because the protection against shakier routes is being applied unevenly, based on how safe you look to the model. From your point of view, you only see three things: the record, the opponent, and how the match feels. You don't see the network routes, you don't see what was in the queue and what was rejected, and you don't see whether the system could have given you a cleaner match and chose not to. So your brain does what brains do. It builds a story. We talked in the Why FC26 Feels Slower episode about how quickly people jump from delay to design, from "this feels bad" to "they've changed something to screw me." If a system keeps letting weaker routes stand while you're on streaks, promotions, or big checkpoints, that story starts to feel inevitable. The pattern is real. The explanation doesn't have to be literal scripting, it can be a mission. So what do we do with this? First, it's important to separate what we know from what we don't. We can't see inside EA's live systems. We do know that multi-objective matchmaking exists across the industry, that engagement optimized profiles are widely used, and that legal standards are usually written in terms of acceptable ranges, not best possible experience every time. Second, it helps to name what's really happening when champ suddenly feels harder. Most of the time, your opponent didn't magically become a pro. You weren't secretly nerfed mid-game. You were pushed into, or left inside, a weaker route because other objectives won the internal argument. And finally, there's the emotional side. Once you understand that your connection can be treated as a resource, something the system spends more freely on stable players, it becomes a little easier to take a step back when those heavy games hit. Not because it makes it fair, but because you're no longer fighting ghosts. The match might still feel awful, you might still lose, but at least you can see the shape of the machine you're inside. And that, for competitive games built on invisible systems, is the first bit of control you get back. Thanks for watching.